Hello and welcome to everyone. We are so happy to have all of you here. This is going to be a fantastic event. So for those of us today, the goal here is to give you a quick, kind of concise resume essentials workshop, but also let you ask your questions because we know everyone's transition is a little different. Everyone's got different things they're wondering about, and I know there's burning questions out there. So we're going to give you the essentials, and if your question's not answered, it will be at the end. So I'm so happy to bring you guys Laurie Norris. She is an expert in the military transition, and she's also a podcast host. That podcast, Lessons Learned for Vets, actually is kicking off season number 2 right now. So if anybody wants to take a second and go ahead and open this in a new tab, do whatever you need to do. It's an amazing podcast. It outlines a bunch of different transitions, kind of how people got to their various roles. It gives good insights because, once again, no one's transition is really going to be the same. So ll4vets.com. So this is brought to you by Boots to Books. So for those of you that don't know about us, our goal is to help through every facet of the education and employment process. We do that in a variety of ways. Coming up, we have a certification pathway opening on our website. We can get Lean Six Sigma, Agile Leader, and more. Coming up in April, we have a hiring event and so much more. So please keep updated with us and don't miss an opportunity to get certified, get looked at by a recruiter who's looking for veterans, and so many more great opportunities. So this event is kind of especially important to me because the resume is something I struggled with and Aubrey kind of had to screw my head on straight with. So I really went with the tactic of making a singular resume that branded me as a real generalist and sent it everywhere that would accept a resume, and really didn't focus, didn't do anything, didn't network. And obviously Aubrey guided that change, and I realized how important it was. But I'm happy anybody on here who is taking the time to do this, you're making a great decision because it really is a essential part of the job search. If you can't get past that, what are you going to do? So without further ado, we have Laurie, and thank you so much for coming on, and I'll hand off the floor to you.
I am excited to be here. I am just amazed at what you and Aubrey have created, and I appreciate you inviting me on to talk to your followers. As Peter said, my name is Laurie Norris. I have been doing this since, I've been supporting military transition since 2005. So I kind of half-jokingly call myself bilingual. Because I don't speak a foreign language. I actually speak a little Spanish and a little Italian. I call it Spitalian. So what I really speak is the language of the U.S. military. And I'm on a mission. Like, it is my mission to teach transitioning service members and veterans how to market themselves and how to translate their terminology. So when Peter asked me to come on and talk to you guys about resumes today, I jumped at the chance because that's one of the subjects that I like to talk about. Nobody really likes resumes, right? Like, nobody enjoys writing their resume. So tell me in the comments if you really enjoy it, but I'd love to hear that. But I don't think most people do. Probably rather go to your taxes than your resume. So what I want to start with are just kind of clearing up some resume misconceptions and myths. And then I want to just take you section by section of the resume and give you some actionable tips that you can use to make your resume better today. Okay, so that's my plan. And then I'm trying to leave lots of room for questions at the end as well. So the first myth I want to clear up, I want to tell you, the resume is not the most important thing that you need to think about in your transition. Oftentimes when we're like, okay, it's time to transition out of the military, I got to get my resume together. That's really not the first thing you need to do. It's not the most important thing you need to do. So yes, the resume is important, but if you put all of your efforts into your resume and you don't practice interviewing, you don't build a LinkedIn presence, you don't network, you will have less job search success. So I want you to know that if only great resumes got jobs, we would have a very high unemployment rate because there are a lot of really bad resumes out there. And Peter told us about his resume, but he still got a job, didn't he? So I think that, bad resumes do get jobs, but a really good resume is going to, a well-written, translated, focused resume is going to expedite your job search. Absolutely. But if you put all of your effort into your resume and don't think about those other things, you might have a great resume and then you get into an interview and it's not going to go well. So have a nice balanced approach to your transition. Okay. So again, that is one of the myths. A resume is critical, and I am a resume writer, but I'm going to tell you, it's not the one and only thing that you need to focus on in this process. So I want you to clear up the fact that your resume is not a storage area for everything you've ever done, right? In the transition assistance program, they teach you to write a master resume, which makes me crazy. It is useless. A master resume is not good for anything other than housing information. And so, sure, have a master resume where you dump everything, but that master resume should never make it into the hands of a potential employer. It's not going to work for you, right? So instead, think of your resume as a strategic marketing document, and you are the product, right? So if you think about the best marketing campaigns, they don't focus on the product, right? So the marketing campaign focuses on the value that the customer is going to get from using the product. So when you're thinking of writing your resume and going out into the job search, you need to do the same thing, right? So here's another news flash for you. Your resume is not about you. The employer doesn't want to know about you. That's not their focus. When they're reading about your resume, like a typical job seeker says, well, I have to tell them about my skills and my work history, my experience, when really all the employer wants to know is, how are you going to add value to my company? What's going to be the return on investment for my company, right? Like, what's in it for me? That's the employer's focus. So they want to hear about their needs, their problems. So take the focus off of you in your resume, your LinkedIn, in your interview answers, and you will blow the competition out of the water, because everybody gets in there and focuses on what they have to offer, and they don't think about their customer, which is that potential employer, right? So think about the fact that employers hire because they have a need or a problem, right? So we need to think about, like, what are their strengths, their weaknesses, their opportunities, their threats. You've probably heard of a SWOT analysis, right? So we've got to figure out how to focus our approach so that we can really think about, like, what makes me a cost-effective employee. So I really want you to, before you even start working on your resume, think about, how are you going to earn the salary that you want them to pay you, right? So what makes you a good value, right? Not the cheapest employee, but the one who's going to bring the most value. And once you know, like, here's how what makes me cost effective, here's how I can add value, then your resume becomes easy. It's just your proof, right? So that, I want you to think about your resume as the proof of what is going to make you cost effective, okay? So when somebody reads your resume, from the very first line of your resume, they should know exactly what your job target is. So I want you to pull out your resume and I want you to look, like, is it really clear what kind of job I'm looking for, right? So Peter talked about his, kind of a, I can do anything, right? Like, what is we've all heard jack of all trades, right? What comes next, Peter? Master of none, right? Yeah.
No, yeah. The resume has never changed.
What we're saying is, I have skills a mile wide and an inch deep. I'm not really an expert in anything. Is that what we want? So again, I want you to think about that. All right. So we don't want them to say, okay, Has anybody ever used oh goodness, what's it called? Like a Leatherman, which has like all these different, a Swiss Army knife, right? It has all these different tools, right? And like, I don't need you to bring me a Swiss Army knife if I just wanted a hammer, right? So what is the tool that's going to help me do the job that I need to do? And that's really what I want you to think about, okay? So, when I said the most important part about your transition is figuring out what you want to do next. That's the most important first step that you can take in a transition process, right? So there is no such thing as an effective generic resume. A resume that tries to appeal to everybody, guess who it appeals to? Nobody, right? So if you've listened to me talk at all, you've heard me probably say that it's like fishing in the ocean, right? Let's just say we're going to go out fishing in the Pacific Ocean. It's kind of a big place. But if you go out fishing in the ocean and you don't know what kind of fish you're going to catch, you're going to come home with no fish and say, there's no fish in this ocean, because you didn't go out with the right bait, the right tackle. You didn't go to the right place where those fish swim. And so you're going to come back thinking there are no fish. So when I'm on LinkedIn and I see like, I can't get anybody to call me back. Nobody is calling me to interview. It's likely your resume. It's likely how you've presented yourself. Not always, but that is there is a good chance that that is the issue. Okay. So again, don't go out trying to catch a hammerhead shark with a butterfly net. It's not going to work. You have to have the right tools, the right bait, the right tackle, right? If you're not a fisherman, I'm sorry, I'm using a fishing metaphor, but that's really the best thing I can think of is I want you to come back with a full bucket of fish, and I want you to have success. So, okay. And then the one thing I also want you to think about is that the employer that's reading your resume doesn't care about what your team did, right? They want to know, what did you do? What part did you play in that accomplishment? I just talked to somebody this week who sat in on an interview. He's just transitioned about a month ago, and he sat in on an interview with a senior officer, and it was a panel interview, and they kept asking the officer, like, well, tell me what you accomplished. And he's like, well, my team did this and we did that. And he said the person that was asking the question kept saying, but what did you do? But what was your part in it? And he said, well, I led them. But how did you make an impact? And they kept pushing him. And those are the things I want you to ask yourself. How did you add value? We're going to talk about that in just a little while. And that I don't want to brag. I don't want to take all the credit. And while it's important to be able to work as part of a team, at some point you are going to have to step aside and take ownership for your part in that team and how you changed things, how you added value, what would have happened if you hadn't been there. And that's the important thing, okay? So again, I want you to remember that they don't want to know about they want to know about you and how you added value, because they're not hiring your entire team. So that story I told you, that after that interview was over, the boss said, I want to go hire his team. I don't want to hire that guy. I want to hire the people that did everything. I want to go hire the people that accomplished things. So I did not do that person any favors by continuing to talk about we and the team, right? So I want you to remember, again, in this process, while getting hired is your top priority, hiring you is not their top priority. Now, we know that once you come on board and they get you trained and you can add value and you're going to be great. But they have other things going on, right? They have, so be patient in this process and know it's a time-consuming process. And so you've got to have that patience. All right. One other thing I actually have two more things I want to tell you before we get into kind of breaking down these different aspects of the resume. I need you to remember it is not the employer's job to translate your military skills. That's your job, right? So the last time you went to a foreign country, did you expect everyone there to learn English so that they could communicate with you? Did you get mad at them when they spoke to you in Germany? Or did you just figure out how to communicate with that person who spoke German, right? Just because you arrived in Germany, they did not say there's a mandate that everyone now has to speak English. Peter's here, right? And so you have to be the same way with the employer, right? You cannot expect them to learn military language for you, right? You have to adapt to them. That is your job, to learn how to do that, okay? And then the last myth I want to clear up, okay? I want to talk about the applicant tracking system, right? Known as the ATS. I'm sorry, the applicant tracking software, known as the ATS. So the ATS is not an evil robot just waiting to say no to you and your resume. Okay, yes, there is an ATS. And yes, you need to write resumes that can easily be read by the ATS. But the ATS is simply a screener of a resume. It is a way for the employer to take your document, parse out information, and create a standard template in their system that they're used to looking at. That's what an ATS does, right? So the ATS does need to be able to read your resume, and the ATS is going to look at keyword matches and look at kind of your viability as a candidate. Do you check the boxes that they're looking at? And then they put you in a ranking order so that then the humans can look at the resume. Now, every company is different in terms of maybe they only read the people that are 90% plus candidates, right? It depends on the company, but the ATS is not the problem. It is a system that, and everybody uses different systems, but almost everybody uses it. So we just want to make sure that our resume is friendly with the ATS. I'm going to give you some quick tips to be ATS friendly. Tip number one, your contact information should not be in a header. So if you have to double click on your name and address, phone number and so forth to edit it, that's in a header. If you went insert header and then you put your name and phone number and email in there, it's a header. ATS cannot parse information out of headers. So if your name and contact info is in a header, you go into their system with no name, no phone number, no email, no way of finding you. They're not going to go back and match it up. So that's really important. So don't use a header. Most ATS can't read text boxes and tables. So we don't want to have information in text boxes or tables that we want the ATS to be able to pick up. All right. So that's really important. And so those are just some of like the major things that you don't want to do. And then you just want to make sure you hit the keywords. So again, I talk a lot about this. I do at least monthly live streams. I do resume Q&As on my page. So if we're not already connected, please follow me. If you just Google Laurie Norris on LinkedIn, or I'm sorry, do a search on Laurie Norris on LinkedIn, you'll find me. I'm easy to find. I'm the lady that's always talking about veterans and resumes because nobody else is talking about them out there, okay? So those are my resume myths. Hopefully some of that was helpful to you. Now, I want to give you some actionable tips. We're just going to start at the top and we're going to go all the way down to the bottom of our resume. I want to give you some things that can impact your resume today, okay? So we're going to start with the contact information. Seems pretty straightforward, right? But again, don't put it in a header. That's really important. So your address is not necessary on your resume. So city and state is perfectly fine. If you are relocating, my recommendation to you is put the city and state of where you want to live on your resume. We don't want them screening you out because you live across the country. They might hesitate to call you. They don't necessarily know that the military is going to pay to relocate you. So I recommend that you just put the city, state where you want to live. When they call you for an interview, you can just explain, I'm currently completing my service commitment in California. I intend to move to Chicago when at the military's expense when I separate in July. So you can explain that very easily. Okay. Let's see, your phone number. So make sure your phone number goes to a voicemail that's set up, that's not full, and that is professional. We don't want, any crazy music or your kids singing Old MacDonald on your voicemail. Make sure that's professional. Let me tell you my thoughts. So I am a big believer in when you're in a job search, I don't recommend answering the phone if you don't recognize the phone number. And here's why. If you're in the middle of the flight line as an Air Force service member and you've got applications out there, you don't have all your info with you out on the flight line. So if someone calls you about a job that you applied to 3 weeks ago, are you going to be able to talk to them intelligently at the spur of the moment? So long ago, my husband was looking for a job and I told him, don't answer the phone. You've got applications out there. And we were at Disneyland and he did not listen to me. I know, big surprise, right? And he answered the phone at Disneyland. And they said, oh, hello, we would like to speak to you about this job. Are you available for an interview right now? And so he had to go find a place at Disneyland to find some quiet, and he had to wing it to do an on-the-spot job interview. Luckily, some really cool lady prepared him well for interviews, and so he nailed it, but that's another story. So that's just how I do it. I recommend you let them leave a message, call them back when you have all your information in front of them, okay? Let's see, your contact information should contain a custom LinkedIn URL. So I don't want it's like linkedin.com/in/your name and then a bunch of numbers. Go out, if you don't know how to create a custom LinkedIn URL, just Google it. Very easy to fix, very quick process. If your name is Mike Smith, you might have to put some numbers in there, but not 7 numbers, okay? So again, just try different iterations of your name so that you can have a custom LinkedIn URL that's really easy for them to enter, and it fits nicely on your contact information line, okay? And then last but not least, you want a professional email address. And I'm a big believer in having an email address that's just for job hunting, but make sure you check it. So I know people that forget to check that email address that they don't use all the time, and they miss opportunities because they didn't respond to recruiters. So that's your contact info section. Hopefully that's helpful to you. Let's go down to the next section, which is your summary section. Now, you may have noticed I didn't say objective because we don't use objectives, but we're going to use our summary to very clearly state our target. So remember I said earlier, from the very first line of your resume, you want to tell them what you're doing next. Now, did you notice I didn't say where you've been, right? So how many of you have a resume that starts off with United States Air Force veteran with 27 years of experience, or United States Army veteran with 10 years of experience? That's not where you're going. That's where you've been. The first line of your resume should not be about where you've been. It should be about where you're going next. The fact that you are a veteran is not the most important thing about you. It is your qualifications and your skills that they care about most of all. They will figure out that you're a veteran as they read your resume and see that your employer was the United States Army or Navy or Coast Guard or Marine Corps or Air Force, right? So don't throw away that opportunity by starting your resume with your veteran status, okay? So that's so again, think about that first line should be, what do you do? How many years of experience do you have? What's the scope at which you've done it? So it might be something like maintenance production manager with 10 plus years of experience leading teams of up to 300 maintenance technicians to complete 6,000 annual maintenance tasks. That's an example of a first line of a summary. I know exactly who you are, what you do, how many years of experience, and the scope at which you've done it. That's what your summary needs to look like, okay? That summary should be short. Think of it as, do they still have Cliff Notes? I don't know, I'm showing my age. But, so again, it's the short, abbreviated version of your experience and the value you can bring. Sorry, you can hear my dogs. So it's a highlight. So it's a good place to put things like software skills, security clearance, if they're relevant to where you want to go, okay? But think of your summary as just a brief overview of what's going to come next. Now let's get to the work experience section. This is the meat. This is the meat of your resume. So this is where we need to flip the script and start talking about your value. I know that's really uncomfortable, isn't it? Oh, I don't want to talk about myself, right? There is a big difference between bragging and simply telling people what you're good at. So I need you to get comfortable being able to talk about what you're good at and how you add value. If I were to tell you, like, I am the best resume writer in the world, that's very arrogant, and it's obviously true. No, I'm kidding. But it's not, I don't have a designation. I haven't received an award. It's just not a fact, to be quite honest with you. But if I said to you, I'm a good resume writer because I have the ability to help people mine out their skills and accomplishments that they hadn't even thought of and turn those into a sales-focused resume that gets their phone to ring, I can back that one up with statistics, with examples, and with references. So it's bragging versus stating facts, right? It's arrogance versus confidence is very subtle. If an arrogant person thinks they are the smartest person in the room, where a confident person knows that they're one of the smart people in the room. Not a big difference, but it's a better than, right? So an arrogance is I'm better than everyone else. And bragging is I'm better than. And if you go into this with the mindset of bragging of, well, if you don't hire me, it's your loss. Guess what? They will figure out how to live without you. And so, but I want you to be comfortable stating the facts of what make you cost effective, worth the money they're going to pay you, of value to that employer, okay? So that's really important when you get to that work experience section, is getting ready to talk about, like, what are you good at? And there's nothing wrong with that. I want you to focus on results in this section, impact in this section, not just tell me what you do every day, right? We're thinking kind of like big picture. How did you make a difference? How did you make it better, right? So stay away from job description language like responsible for or duties included, and really think about, how did I make a difference? We want measurables, so numbers, number of people. Like if you're in logistics, what's the number of tonnage of cargo you're moving? Well, how many line items are you managing, right? So we want dollar amounts. We want percentages. So we want to help the reader understand the scope of your impact But we also want them to understand at what level you were contributing, because most people think that what you do in the military is so different than what's done in the private sector that when they see it in black and white, they're kind of blown away at the level of responsibility that you've held. So it's really important to use those numbers, okay? So I want to give you a quick example of a bullet point where how it looked on a military eval and how we rewrote it for a bullet on a resume, okay? And some of you might have heard me say this in my last live stream, but I think it's a really good example. So I had someone I was working with that was an aircraft mechanic who wanted to go into corporate finance. His resume was all about aviation maintenance. So if he applied to a job in corporate finance, they would have looked at this and said, well, you're an aircraft mechanic, you're not qualified, right? And so he had to take the aircraft maintenance out and focus on his education in finance and the responsibilities that he had that had a financial impact on the organization where he worked, right? So one of his bullets read like this, and it said, oversaw the purchase and replacement of hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of storage racks, increasing the 660th Air Refueling Squadron's efficiency by 85%. What? Right? So I asked him, like, what does that even mean? And you know what he said? He's like, I'm not really sure. My supervisor just put that in my EPR, and so I put it on my resume. It's a bullet that means nothing, right? And so one of the things I want you to think about when you read your bullets, I want you to ask yourself, so what? At the end of every bullet, ask yourself, so what? So what difference did it make? So what was the impact? So what will this mean to my next employer? And until you can answer those questions in your bullet, keep writing them. If the answer to that so what question isn't clear in your resume, keep writing until it's clear, okay? So let me tell you how we rewrote it, but I want to take you through the process. So the first thing I asked him was, okay, how big was the organization? That'll help me because I don't care if it's the 660th Air Refueling Wing. I want to know the scope of the organization. I said, okay, what did you do? Turns out he took an empty warehouse and he went out and procured storage racks and he reorganized the warehouse to streamline the picking and pulling of kits for faster customer service. Okay. He told me he cut the response time in half from 6 hours to 2.5 to 3 hours so he can get stuff to his customers faster. So I asked him, well, how many times a day are you doing that? Are you saving those 3 hours? And he said about 3 times a day, so 24/7 environment. So I took 3 hours a day times 3 times, which is 9 hours. I multiplied 9 hours times 365 days a year. And I came up to 13,140 hours saved each year. So that's a lot more tangible than an 85% efficiency increase, right? So here's how I wrote it. And this is just something I sketched out really quick. I said saved 13,000 plus productivity hours annually for a 300-person organization after leading a $200,000 project that reorganized production staging area and cut customer delivery time by 50%. Okay, now that could be improved even further, but look at all those metrics in there. And now the employer says, oh, that's a tangible. I want my customers to get serviced 50% faster, right? I want to save 13,000 hours in annual productivity. Now they're starting to see how you can add value. So that's an example of just one bullet that was totally transformed, okay? So Again, that's how you translate your military skills from a bullet on your eval to relevant, understandable accomplishments that answer the so what question, right? So don't just tell us you have skills, prove it to us with your examples and tell us why you're good at it, right? So it doesn't help to just say project management skills. Instead, say, led up to 17-person cross-functional project teams and managed projects with budgets of up to $2 million with a 97% success rate of bringing them in on time under budget. That's going to mean a lot more to an employer than just saying, I'm a project manager, okay? So hopefully that helps you make some changes to your work experience bullets. The last thing I want to talk about is education. So let's say you're working with the amazing people at Boots to Books and you have education that is in progress. Those degrees, those certifications that aren't yet finished absolutely can be listed on your resume. So in bold, you're going to put your certification, your degree in progress, and you're going to, next to it, put who you're taking that education through. And then very clearly at the end, you're going to say in progress or due 2023. So the eye skimming is going to see, oh, you have that education. When the person comes back to read it, they're going to say, oh, it's in progress. They're dedicated to continuing their education. So yes, list degrees in progress. Let's say you have multiple degrees, multiple masters or multiple associates, bachelor's degrees. I want you to choose the most relevant because we don't want you to come across as unfocused or overqualified, right? So if you write a resume and you've got like, let's say you're, I don't know, you're looking to be a landscape artist and you went out and you got your Security Plus, your PMP, your licensed massage therapist, and your real estate license, and you're writing a resume as a landscape artist, are they going to look at that and go, well, what does this person actually want to do, right? So I am all for education and certifications. I think it's great to increase your knowledge. You've got to look at your resume, your LinkedIn profile and say, is this going to make me look more qualified or is it going to make me look overqualified or unfocused? So you've got to decide what you want to list, okay? The only time I recommend putting dates of education on your resume is if they cover a gap in your employment. So you take some gap time between your military service and when you're looking for a job to pursue your education, or if the recency of your education is important to its relevancy, okay? My education was a really long time ago. If I put my date on there, number one, you'd know that I'm old. And you also might think that my education is outdated. So I put my education on there, but I also talk about the continuing education that I pursue, okay? Let's see, GPA, if it's under 3.5, it doesn't need to be listed. And then honors like magna cum laude, summa cum laude, I recommend you spell those out and put, with honors, with highest honors, because the Latin version actually contain a bad word. Just it is, and there are some ATSs that will kick your resume out for having that word in them. So again, spell out those honors instead of listing them, okay? Okay, so that was a very condensed, fast resume session, but I hope you found some good information in there. I wanted you to have actionable tips that you could put into place immediately. So if we aren't already connected, follow me on LinkedIn, reach out to me. I will be starting my resume Q&A sessions up next week. And again, as Peter said, I host the Lessons Learned for Vets podcast, so please tune in. Our goal is I interview veterans who've already made this transition, and our goal is just to educate and inform you so that we can help smooth the path of your transition ahead. So now I just want to open it up for questions.
Definitely. Well, so we have a couple in here. And before I read the first one, we've been asked for the recording. Definitely, we're going to record it. Once we get it up on YouTube, I'll release it on the Boots to Books page. I just want to reiterate a couple of things that you said, Laurie, that I thought were really important and kind of struck a chord with me. And definitely as far as the military transition, I think, over this past year, especially a lot of the veterans that we've spoken to and military spouses, people looking for work, know the industry they want to work in, but not the role. And that's fine. I completely understand, but that's something you should strive towards, because knowing the role you want to work in, or at least having a general sense, as opposed to having no idea. Like Laurie said, you can get every certification, every education in the world, but if you don't know what you're working towards, you could be taking a real zigzag path to that goal that's right in front of you. So I think that was really important. And then also, highlighting yourself a little bit when you really did come from a team approach in the military, when you're, taught to promote your team and work on them, it's a hard change to make. So I really think that's important. We have Luis asked, any advice for transitioning service members writing their first resume?
Okay. So number one advice I have for you is figure out your focus, right? So knowing where you're going will drive everything else, right? So know your focus, know where you're going. And then I recommend going to a tool like ONET, and you can put your military occupation code, your AFSC, your MOS, whatever branch of the military you're in, you can enter that into the ONET crosswalk tool, and then pull up where you want to go, like the job that you're targeting, and then start to lay those out, and you'll see the things that match up. And then you'll start to see, like, what are you missing, right? So again, that's the important thing, right? So that's your first step. And then, pull out your military evals, lay out your timeline. And so most of you have your military timeline looks a little like this. I need you to streamline it. So where can I group things together that will help me make this easy to understand and digestible for someone that doesn't know anything about the military? And then just start thinking about your accomplishments job by job. How did you make a difference? How did you make an impact? And then once you get it done, I know our initial, we want to show it to everybody, right? Let me get everyone's opinion, but that will make you crazy. So pick a couple of experts, ask their opinion, pick a couple of industry people. But here's the thing I'm going to tell you. If someone tells you to make a change on your resume, the most important question you're going to ask them is, why? Why do you think I should change that? And if they can give you a strategic reason why, then it's a valid point to consider. If they can't, it's likely just their opinion. And so that's something you have to weigh as well. Okay. I'm showing my toys back there. So that's kind of those are some just general tips of how to get you launched and started in the right direction. Hopefully that helps, Luis.
Definitely. And something I found really helpful as far as translating your experience is find a friend who's not extremely familiar with the military community and just read them your bullets and be like, do you understand what I'm talking about? And if they're like, what the heck is an NCOIC? Like, okay, maybe I should take that acronym out. That's an extreme example, but I found that really helpful. I read mine to Aubrey, and he, a lot of my stuff was super confusing to anybody who wasn't, in the Army infantry. So, that could really help as well when you're trying to translate some things. And then also for everyone out there, if there is, or if you would like some follow-up resources, it'll include Laurie's resume checklist she's been kind enough to put together for us. It'll include a link to listen to season 2 of Lessons Learned for Vets podcast, Boots to Books upcoming events and certification opportunities, a bunch of great stuff. Reach out to info@bootstobooks.com. We'll be happy to send it to you as well as the recording, because I know that there are some people that would love to see that. And I don't know if we have any more questions. So I just want to say, Laurie, on behalf of all of us, really, that was so informative. And I know that I'm grateful, and I, have some changes to make to my own resume after this. But I just really want to say thank you. It's amazing that you came on and gave us an hour of your time to answer all these questions.
Can I address a couple of comments that I see? Peter,
Oh, yeah.
do you mind if I take a minute? So
Yeah.
Charles says his job has no civilian crossover, right? And so that happens sometimes, right? There is like, maybe you're you work in the load barn and you're like, I can't verify people building bombs in the private sector, but you do have really important transferable skills that come from your career field that can be used in a different way. So that person in the load barn in the Air Force that's supervising and evaluating whether people can build the bombs correctly, follow specifications, follow safety, they could be a safety inspector. They could be a quality assurance inspector. They could be a technical trainer. So there's so many things that person could go and do with the skills that they have. So maybe you don't have an equivalent and maybe you don't want to do the same thing, right? And so again, that's okay if there's not an equivalent and you want to go a different direction. You just have to find the relevance in your current role with where you want to go next. Okay.
Definitely. I agree with you. And I'd say that, I went from being an infantryman to working in politics, and now I work in finance. And you could definitely say that there is no direct crossover in the sense of I wasn't using Excel in the infantry all that much, but in terms of the soft skills you bring, the work ethic you bring, adaptability, resilience that those type of work environments are going to demand, it's there. And there's a lot of people there that understand that value you bring. Even if it's not the most, obvious thing at first, you bring a lot of intrinsic value, and that's an important thing to recognize. Laurie, we got a couple more questions. So
okay.
Let's go to, how should transitioning service members list their collateral duties?
Well, if they're relevant, they can just focus on that collateral duty, right? So let's say that I am, I'm in the munitions career field, but I had a collateral duty I'm just using Air Force because it comes to mind, as a first sergeant. And I really want to do employee relations and human resources, then I'm going to focus just on that, right? So I agree with you, Charles, by the way. So, but so a collateral duty should only be mentioned if it's relevant. So is it focused on where you want to go? And you can actually just talk about your collateral duty if that's the direction you want to go. So that's how I would handle it. Like, it's not a typical thing in a private sector company to have like a job title and then 4 collateral duties. Like, that is normal in the military. And so if you tell someone you did all of these things, you're going to overwhelm them, confuse them, and they're going to go, well, what do you want to do? Right? So again, targeted focus. So collateral duties should only come into play if it's relevant to where you want to go next.
Definitely. I completely agree with you there. And I think there's a lot of ways to reflect that well. We have the next one. How would you translate the title non-commissioned officer in a civilian resume?
Okay. Your manager. So it's like an NCO is a manager of whatever you're in charge of. So it depends on what you're the NCO of, but that word, those 3 words together, should not be on your resume anywhere. You could be a team leader, you could be a supervisor, you could be a manager, but an NCO or a non-commissioned officer should not be anywhere on that resume. Okay.
Okay, let's see. We've got a few more. That's a good question.
About the LinkedIn from Justin. I'm going to pull that one up. Definitely.
Here it is.
We're not here to talk about LinkedIn, but I wanted to talk about this one because this is a thing that a lot of people do. Like, they write their resume and then they just copy paste it onto their LinkedIn profile. Right. And those two things serve very different purposes. Your resume is what you send in response to a job posting, and should be, targeted, focused to the job and the company as much as possible. Your LinkedIn is kind of a living, breathing online profile for you. And it should be your highlights. It should also be very keyword heavy so that you show up in searches, but it should be written as though you're having a conversation with someone and telling them about your experience. It should not be a copy paste of your resume, because they're going to LinkedIn. If they have your resume in their hand, they're going to LinkedIn to verify and validate and to see, like, how do you interact with people online? If they find you on LinkedIn and they don't have your resume yet, you want those keywords to show up. And so I don't recommend they be an exact replica of each other. They serve two different purposes. Okay.
Sonia asked for the email again. It is info@boots2books.com. I will also put it in the follow-up post in the comments. I'll do everything I can possibly to get this recording out to everyone and give you the chance to get the additional resources as well. The next is from Courtney. Courtney says, thank you for the info. Is there an easy tool to have a resume scanned by an ATS and evaluated? Or maybe an friendly template?
What's that?
I said, or maybe an ATS friendly template, because I know those are out there.
So first of all, let's talk templates. Stay away from Microsoft Word templates, because those templates in Microsoft Word are full of text boxes, tables, headers, and the formatting, that overly formatted look that you're going to find in there, is going to mess with the ATS. So there is a company out there called JobScan. I think it's a tool you can use. I wouldn't live and die by what JobScan tells you. So I think that there are a lot of tools out there that are free until they're not free, until they try to sell you something. And so use it as a guideline, as opposed to like living and dying by what JobScan says. Honestly, like, I've had resumes that got jobs. I put them into JobScan and the score was like a 30%, but they worked. And so, but it's a good way to look at it. I like to do a word cloud. Like, you can make a word cloud from the job description. You can make a word cloud from, there are a couple of tools out there that can help you with that, and it matches up your percentage. So bottom line is, when you're targeting and focusing a resume, like, you don't want to try to apply to 20 jobs in a week, 100 jobs in a week. You're going to get more results, more calls for interviews from 5 to 10 focused, targeted resumes than if you're just sending out resumes to everything, the same resume to everything. So slow down, take the time to research the company, research the organization's culture, mission, problems, do that SWOT analysis I talked about, create your resume just for that job posting. And you can probably only send 5 to 10 a week, and that's okay, because those are going to be more effective for you. And then go network with those people on LinkedIn and get in front of them that way. So
definitely, that really goes into the targeting that you talked about, though, and finding what you want to do post-military. And the job description is a description of who they're looking for. If you ever need, a guideline to structure your resume off of, they just handed you one. The words that occur very often in the job resumes are often the ones that they're searching for viable candidates. So there's always something there. We've got another question from Rod here, who wants to know bullets, 1 line or 2. Should there be a mix, or does it really matter? Good question.
So I try to keep bullets to no more than 2 lines. Sometimes I break that rule and there's a random 3-line bullet in there, but we don't want like 7-line bullets. That's a paragraph, right? And so, 2-line bullets max. That's what you're shooting for. It's okay to break that rule. Nobody's going to say no if you have a 3-line bullet, but just remember, like, people give you 10 to 15 seconds of attention. And we need to make it as easy for them to read and as easy for them to find the wow factor, right? So if you think about what a resume's purpose is to compel them to call you. So we want to give them, as we want to give it a brief overview, right? No more than 2 pages. And by the time they finish, they should feel the need to talk to you because they see that you can solve their problems.
Right. Definitely. I think that's a really good way to put it. We've got another one here. Andrew, I'm sorry I missed you up above there. Andrew wants to know where a good place to get a professional resume review is.
So I think Peter talked about, I have given him I created the veteran self-inspection resume checklist. That's a really long title. But I created that. I think it's got 10 or 13 items for you to review. So I want you to get that from the follow-up information that Peter's going to send out. Start there. But go to people in industry, right? So ask for informational interviews. Ask them if they would give your resume a look and tell you what they think. Don't show it to your fellow veterans because they're going to understand what you're talking to. So show it to someone that doesn't know anything about the military. And like Peter said earlier, like, do you understand what I'm talking about here? And if they're confused, right, we want to make it so a 6th grader can understand what you do. And many of you write your resumes very high level. And I'm like, but what does that mean? Just like that bullet I read to you earlier. Like, I want to make sure that someone understands exactly what you did and how you added value. So I'm happy to look at resumes, but I am hard to get a hold of. So, but if you reach out to me, I will do my best to give you some feedback. But I'm only one person. And so your transition centers, Fleet and Family Services, Airmen and Family Readiness, like the SFL TAP centers, those guys can look at them for you as well. So
you can definitely also reach out to Team B2B. We'd be happy to give it a look. And if it's some industry that we have no clue about, we'd be happy to connect you with someone who has a better idea and can give you a look. But there's a lot of resources out there, Andrew. I would definitely wait before paying for anything because you'd be surprised at how much you can get for free. The next is from Genevieve, who wants to know, how would you rewrite train soldiers to become a non-commissioned officer?
Led leadership development courses. So that's what I would say is you could talk about did you implement pre-existing curriculum? Did you create your own curriculum and training materials? Like, how many did you teach? But yeah, that's just a leadership development, right? So led leadership development, professional communication, and project management skills. That would be how I would write it.
Definitely. Yeah. And you can look at, the outcome, how many non-commissioned officers you produce, how'd they score on whatever tests you were training them on. There's always metrics to be found and ways to quantify your impact. I think a lot of it too takes kind of sitting down with your military service and looking for opportunities to do that and ways to gather that data to support what you've done. So the next, I don't have a name here, but it's if someone has an MBA and puts in a job for bachelor's or lower degree, what's the impact of leaving the MBA off of the resume when they send it to an employer? Do they appear overqualified with the MBA?
Okay, so my answer to you is it depends, right? Should you include it if you're hearing a lot of that, I think you're overqualified, then probably the MBA is the cause of that. But what's the impact of leaving it off? Nothing. Your resume is a marketing document. It is not a legal document. So you get to put what you want onto that resume. However, an application is a legal document. So when you fill out your application and it says list all of your education, you sign at the end, I verify that this is true, thorough, and complete. And that is a legal document. So the MBA needs to go on that application. But that typically doesn't happen until you're in the interview process. So You can leave it off if you want to. There is no impact to you to leaving it off. I think if you're applying to be a carpenter and you have an MBA, there is a chance that they may not call you. But if you're applying to be a mid-level manager where a bachelor's is required and you have an MBA, I think that makes you more marketable. So you've got to just evaluate it on a case-by-case basis on kind of what's the level? Am I going 3 steps above what's required, or am I just 1 step above? And that might help you determine if you should leave it on there or not.
Definitely. I think that's a good one. I know, someone that I was connected with was having trouble when transitioning out of the military and looking at entry-level cybersecurity jobs. And the issue wasn't an issue of being underqualified. It was the issue of appearing overqualified. And the remedy to it wasn't leaving an education or an experience off the resume. It was changing the tier of jobs he was applying to, and started applying to higher level jobs and realizing, like, wait, I'm actually conveying my value well, maybe a little too well for these jobs, and ended up landing a higher level role and is very happy in it. So, I would look at the roles too. There may be a role that asks for an MBA within a company you really want that's similar to that bachelor's role, that they wouldn't, that ultimatum wouldn't exist in.
Yeah. Are you undervaluing yourself, right? I think veteran underemployment is one of the biggest issues for veterans at this time. I think that a lot of times veterans get out of the military and they panic and they take the first job that's offered to them, which typically below, it could be, it's not typically, but it could be below what they're worth. And so take a time in this process to really assess what are my skills worth out in the private sector, and where should I be aiming, my job search. And that comes through informational interviews and research.
Definitely. I completely agree. And I think that is all the
questions. We got them now.
That looks like all of them. I'll tell you what, if we get more questions before we have the recording process and we're able to upload it to YouTube, we'll try to answer them. And when we make that follow-on document with more great resources for you guys, we'll put the Q&As in there. I know we've been trying to record the questions asked so far. So make sure, if you want the follow-on document, if you want the recording, if you want a link to season 2 of the Lessons Learned for Vets podcast and more of Laurie's expertise, follow Boots to Books, follow Lessons Learned for Vets, and we'll have the follow-on post. But if you need the email one more time, info@bootstobooks.com, and we'll put together an email and send it to all of you with all the amazing stuff. But that's all I have, Laurie. Thank you again so much for coming on. It was a pleasure.
Thanks everybody for being here.
Awesome. Well, have a great time. Have a great weekend.